Hello, nature lovers, and welcome to another exciting adventure with environmental systems and societies. Today is all about how we maintain biodiversity, and I want to warn you right now, this is a very long video, but we also go very fast, so you will probably want to pause it quite a bit to get these notes. There's a lot of little things that add up, and frankly, it ends up being kind of a sad video, and I apologize for that in advance. So let's talk about what does help to maintain biodiversity. Complexity does. If you have an ecosystem like a rainforest that has a lot of complexity, if something's hurt, if something happens like a natural disaster, it can usually bounce back, okay? The stage of succession influences biodiversity. So if a volcano erupts and creates an island, at first there's not a lot of diversity, but over time, as succession continues, the diversity builds up. So the further it's gone through succession, the better. The availability of limiting factors. You go somewhere like a rainforest where there's lots of light and warmth and water and nitrogen, then you have a whole bunch of biodiversity. If you have a lot of limiting factors, you don't. And then finally, inertia, resilience, and stability. Inertia is the property of an ecosystem to resist change. Resilience is the ability to recover from disruption, and stability is the ability to maintain equilibrium. When you have those three things, you have biodiversity. But there are many things that destroy biodiversity, and not all of them are man-made. One is, natural hazards, okay? Floods, volcanoes, droughts, fires, earthquakes, tsunamis, all those things can lower biodiversity. They can take away habitat, but humans take away habitat quite a bit, probably more than anything else. So, and if you don't have a habitat, then you don't have an organism. That stands to reason, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay, what's our biggest reason we take away habitat? Just put in farms. So, the other thing that happens is we fragment a habitat. We don't wipe out a whole forest, but we turn it into a bunch of forest islands. And the effect of this is to separate populations, which sometimes leads to biodiversity, but the truth is that edge effect of having all these islands with an edge to them actually opens it up to more disease. So pollution's really just the wrong nutrient in the wrong place at the wrong time, okay? But that pollution can come from factories or chemical spills or fertilization of farms, and the problem is it messes up the abiotic factors that create a habitat. So now our habitat's altered, and if a habitat's altered, it's not going to support the right animals, and that's going to lower biodiversity. Another one is overexploitation of organisms, okay? We, as humans, are great at chopping down trees with chainsaws instead of an axe. We are great with using sonar and giant nets to catch fish. We are great to use scopes and rifles for hunting. All of these things make us very efficient, but we overdo how much we take. It's not sustainable. Okay? Another thing we do is in non-native species, we introduce them, sometimes intentionally, like a potato or kudzu, and sometimes unintentionally. We bring over wood that has chestnut blight, which is a virus. It gets on our Native American chestnut trees and wipes them out. The picture of the rabbits there was when they moved rabbits to Australia thinking that'd be cool, and they went nuts, millions of them. Okay, so then you got spread of disease. I talked a little bit of this with the fragmentation, but basically when you introduce different species, domesticated and wild, diseases are spread between them. So these black-footed ferrets are now no longer because they got canine distemper. Okay. Along with this, we have modern agricultural practices, which we've watched a whole video on, but it's the idea, look, you got monocultures, well, one plant with one set of genetics composed instead of 100, that's pretty obvious that biodiversity is going to go down. Genetic engineering is designed to kill insects and competing plants, as is pesticides. Those things end up making it with just one or two things there with diversity instead of 100. Why should we? So when we talk about biodiversity, the poster child is a rainforest. And why should we care, right? It's so far away from us. But here's the deal. 40% of the oxygen in the world comes from rainforest. 50% of the trees comes from rainforest. It's so much more diverse, and the reason it's so much more diverse is because there's so much more photosynthesis and there's so much more productivity. Why? Because the temperature is right. There's a lot of rainfall, there's a lot of sunlight, there's plenty of nitrogen in the soil and phosphorus and potassium, and the seasons don't change, so it happens year-round. And that makes this incredibly productive, diverse ecosystem. So why are we destroying something that's so diverse? Well, economics. Here's the deal. 50% of the trees means there's a resource of timber. Timber is the second most sought after resource on the planet after oil. Palm oil plantations are very profitable. So you clear out all the woods and you put in these palm oils, and that's what you're looking at there. And if you notice, the top was the old rainforest there. And lots of other reasons, subsistence farming and so forth. Now, it turns out that not all species are equally susceptible to extinction or being wiped out. And so some areas stay more diverse than others, but there's things that make a species prone to it. And here's a big list. Number one, narrow geographical range, okay? It means that if it only exists in one place and you take out that one place, it's no longer going to exist, okay? The Aral Sea's gone, the Colorado River's gone, everything that lived there is gone. The Ozark Hellbender lives here in our Ozark streams. We messed that up, it's gone. So what makes a species prone to extinction also? Number two, small population size. If a population gets really small, the genetic diversity is real limited, okay? And it can't fight off disease. And so an example is a cheetah. A cheetah, you can take a piece of skin from this cheetah, put it on another cheetah, and that cheetah will not resist it. And which is great if you're trying to do a skin graft, but it's terrible if you're trying to fight disease. Low population densities and large territories. So if you have an animal that is trying to go over a big area to find food, the chances they're going to run into a mate so that they can have offspring is diminished. If that's the case, they have less children. Okay? And it turns out, what are the animals that usually do this? Large-bodied animals. So top predator. And we already talked about the energy limitations for top predators, but also if they don't have a big enough area to hunt, they can't get that energy. If they can't find a mate, they can't pass it on. So top predators really have an issue here, especially the ones with big bodies. And then you add in low reproductive potential. And what does this mean? It just means it's an animal that maybe only reproduces once a year and maybe only has one or two offspring. That's if something happens to those offspring, that's not keeping the numbers up. A great example is a penguin. They have one egg per pair per year. If something happens to this offspring, then they don't have anything for that year to show for it. Okay, another one, seasonal migrants. Now, what's this mean? Just think of birds going from Canada to Mexico. And if they leave Canada and they have a great habitat, but they get to Mexico and their habitat's been wiped out, now they don't have food. And they don't have any way to get back because they don't have enough energy to get back to Canada. So they're going to starve, and that biodiversity is gone. Another great example is salmon that are trying to go up the rivers in the west, which we've dammed. And when we dam them, they can't get up unless we put this little nifty salmon ladder up there for them to get up there, up the river to spawn. Another problem is if a plant or an animal is a bad disperser. And what that means for animals, if you can't fly to escape a predator and somebody introduces a new predator, you're going to die. That happened to the dodo bird. But with plants, if they can't spread their seeds and there's some sort of fire, that genetic diversity is destroyed. Okay? And so, and that's not necessarily a human problem, but sometimes it is. Okay, so what if you're a specialized feeder? What's that mean? What if you're a giant panda? You only eat bamboo, or you're a koala bear. You only eat eucalyptus. Okay, if we take out your bamboo or your eucalyptus for whatever reason, farming, herbicide, whatever, all of a sudden you die. Okay, those are the really kind of interesting, sexy animals. But there's lots of animals this happens to that only eat one thing. Another big one that humans do is we hunt well. And what I mean by that is when we want a tree, we don't just use an axe. We use a chainsaw and we get it done fast. When we want to hunt a buffalo or a bison, we don't just use an arrow. We use rifles and horses, and we organize and we wipe these things out. We overdo it. We don't know how to keep it sustainable. Okay? Now here's the other problem. Species, they're not just subjected to one of these things I just listed, they're subjected to several of these things. So a tiger, it might have a low reproductive potential, it might have large territory to move through, it might have low energy coming to it. That's 3 or 4 or 5 different things that are putting pressure on its population. I'm going to talk about its population in a second. So how far can they go down? Well, there's a minimum viable population size, and this varies depending on the species. And so it depends if it has low genetic diversity or high, if it has a fast rate of reproduction or slow, if it has a high mortality rate, all those things depend. But the big carnivores, typically the magic number is 500. Okay, so let's look at some numbers here and see how important that is. At one point, there were 3,500, or right now, there are 3,500 tigers left in the world. And it's estimated that 100 years ago, there were 40,000. Just 100 years ago. 700 blue whales exist right now. 60 years ago, only 60 years ago, your grandparents were alive when there were 250,000 whales in Antarctica. Now there's 700. If that doesn't stop and make you go, holy crap, what are we doing? I don't think anything will. It's that serious. So what's the difference between extinct and endangered and recovered? Extinct means the last one of that species is dead. Endangered means it looks like that species is going to go extinct. Recovered means they actually are not going to go extinct, and the causes that made it go extinct have been fixed. That's rare, but it's cool when it happens. So, we've talked about a lot of stuff. Hopefully, you've stopped and written it all down. If you have questions, please let me know. Otherwise, peace out, homie. Tasmanian tiger. It does not exist anymore.